Hello, everybody. I'm Carlos Ramirez. I'm here today with Dr. Bowie, who is the Executive Director of Strengthening the Black Church for the 21st century. And before we start with our conversation, I just want to greet everybody who's joining us today. Thank you for taking the time to be with us and for this important topic that it is about Juneteenth and the importance um, for our country and for our church. And I mean, Dr. Bowie is, as I said, he's the National Executive Director of the United Methodists Strengthening the Black Church for the 21st century. And he's been doing so since 2020. And he has an array of credentials, an array of experience, which I will invite you to look for him and to look for all what he has done. But there is something that I would like to emphasize among many other things about his local church work and his work with the African American community and beyond. But Dr. Bowie is an author and a co-writer of the book Dare to Shift, which I know that in Oklahoma we have read that book many times, and it has been spread out or widely announced, for use in this book. So again, the book is Dare to Shift, challenging leaders to a new way of thinking. And so, Dr. Bowie, I just want to thank you once again for being here with us today and for accepting the invitation. And thank you for taking the time. So, without further ado, if that's okay, I would like to ask you the first question. For those who may not be familiar with its full history, why is Juneteenth such an important milestone, not only in American history, but also for the church?
But thank you, Carlos, for this opportunity to talk about the importance of Juneteenth. And I take it as an honor. And just want you to know, as I'm answering questions, I may look at my notes a little bit because I really want to lay out this important issue of Juneteenth. But Juneteenth was celebrated on June 19th as the official day in 1865 when enslaved African Americans they would receive their freedom. Now it was 2.5 years later, 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation was signed by then Abraham Lincoln. But General Gordon B. Granger gave this announcement in 1865 in Galveston, Texas, right south of Houston, Texas, and it was African Americans' quest for freedom, equality, and justice. And I think it's important for the church to realize that Juneteenth matters because at the heart of the gospel is all about freedom and liberation. If you remember when Jesus gave his mission statement in Luke 4 and 18, Jesus proclaimed freedom for the oppressed. He talked about dignity for the marginalized, and he talked about hope for society, for those who society had forgotten about. So at the end of the day, Juneteenth is more than just a political matter, but it's a deep spiritual matter because God always stands on the side of the marginalized and the oppressed, seeking liberation.
Thank you for that. Yes, and for reminding us. And I really like how you put it or phrase it. Jesus' mission statement in Luke
Yeah.
4. I really appreciate that. Thank you. Yes. All right. So Juneteenth celebrates, as you just said, freedom. And also reminds us that freedom was delayed for many people, as you just also said. So what lessons can the church learn from that reality today, of this delayed of freedom and not announcing it right away?
Great question, Carlos. I believe one of the greatest lessons the church can learn a lot of lessons, but one of the greatest lessons the church must learn is that silence in the face of injustice often delays freedom for others. It's critical to understand that the tragedy of Juneteenth is not simply about slavery, but 2.5 years later that African Americans received the news that other people have been free since 1863. So the church must always understand that whatever systems oppress people, whatever communities are denied opportunities, I believe it's the church's responsibility. The church can't afford to be silent, and the church must speak up because remember, delayed justice is still injustice. And the church must always be willing to speak and stand up where justice is needed the most. So it's so important that the church speaks up wherever injustice is um, noticed.
Yeah, I remember. I grew up Roman Catholic, and it reminds me of
Same
when
here.
we confess.
Yeah.
We say the forgive me for my sins of doing or of omission as well, like
Omission and
not
commission.
doing any
Yeah.
something. Yeah, omission.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that remind me of that. Yes, so omission or delaying or doing nothing, that is
Mhm.
also part of relaying freedom and justice and so on and so forth. So, how has the Black Church helped preserve the story and significance of Juneteenth across generations?
Well, the Black church, Carlos, has always been the keeper of story and memory for Black communities. I mean, long before schools taught our history, it was the Black church always telling our powerful story. I mean, it preserved the struggles for ancestors and reminded future generations where we came from, and also talked about the hope alive, and also during seasons where society's tried to erase the right now is trying to erase our history. The Black church always preserved and told the story about the struggles of Black Americans. I mean, the Black church was more than just a place of worship. It was a place of resistance, a place of education, a place of healing, a place of organizing, and even a place of empowerment. I mean, Juneteenth survived because of ancestors who've gone before us, but also I believe they allowed the story of freedom to not disappear. And the Black church has always, for centuries, helped carry out that story to move forward. So the Black church is very important in the whole issue of Juneteenth.
Thank you for being the keepers and our reminder of all of this. So appreciate that for us as somebody who's learning from this and from
Yes.
somebody who has come late into the story. I'm glad that you help preserve all of this for us.
Yes.
So, as United Methodists, how can we honor Juneteenth in ways that move beyond a single day of recognition and become part of our ongoing discipleship and community life?
Great question. I think honoring Juneteenth, Carlos, cannot be simply about just celebrating one day in June. But as United Methodists, we must make sure that justice is a part of our discipleship making process. That means educating congregations about the racial history of this country, and also engaging in courageous conversations about inequity. And I would even say investing in underserved communities, and especially those who serve poverty, and where there's systemic injustice and oppression. And I think churches can really do a great part where people can feel valued, seen, heard, and empowered. And I think the church's major role in that. And John Wesley said it best. He said, "When there's no holiness without social holiness." And if we truly want to honor Juneteenth in this United Methodist Church, then justice must become a part of how we live our everyday lives of faith. Not just one day, but how do we live it daily?
I was listening earlier today, a note on another, just kind of the news and everything. And without getting into the nitty gritty of that, I was just listening of how this pastor was explaining how he understood faith. And he said something in the lines of, well, he said, I have a conversation with another person whose understanding was more on the piety side, more individualistic.
Yeah.
He says, which is fine. He says we need to have our own personal faith and be pious about it. But he said, it says biblical or the way that he understands it, and I think you too, and I also is that it cannot just be piety. It has to be mercy. It has to be something that transforms the society, that addresses systemic ways of injustice, systemic ways of racism, systemic ways of undermining people's dignity, and so on and so forth. And
Yeah.
it is, and that transcends to me. Or I will put it this way: I think that is the next step for that pietistic or pietism, or personal as a response to it. I just again made me think of that.
because piety, I think, is good, but you must have not just holiness, but a social holiness to live this whole lifestyle of faith out. And I love what John Wesley did when he laid that out. Yeah, yeah,
Great. Awesome. All right, moving right along. So, what gives you hope when you think about the next generation and the church's role in building communities that reflect God's love, justice, and reconciliation?
yeah. I got excited when I read this question because I believe it's going to take the future generations to really change this system and help move the needle on this whole thing of racism and injustice. And what gives me hope is that young people are asking deeper questions. They're no longer satisfied with superficial faith or surface questions. They want authenticity. They want to engage and grapple in issues of justice. They want to experience their true purpose so that they can make an impact in their communities and in the kingdom of God. So I believe the church has a tremendous opportunity right now to meet young generations where they are right now, to help them understand that faith, once again, that faith is not disconnected from their everyday living. How do you have, the social and the holiness? How does it come together and realize they living this out every day? So you can't just have faith and not have justice, but I think they both go together. Yeah.
Definitely. Yes, I agree with you. These younger generations, my children, they are on those Gen Zs, and they have these deep questions and
Yeah.
deep conversations that sometimes I was not even ready for them, and they ask
Yeah.
these things. So it's
And
good.
my hope, Carlos, before we go to the next question, but I believe with this generation, Gen Z and this Alpha generation, my hope is that this next generation will help the church to become even more courageous in living out the gospel. This is a strong generation, and I believe our new vision statement says, love boldly, serve joyfully, and lead courageously. I think they're going to really lead courageous, so we can really be the hands and feet of Jesus Christ.
Yes, lead courageously. I like that. Yes, 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 indeed. Well, what for wrapping this up, for wrapping this wonderful conversation. If you could leave Oklahoma United Methodists with one challenge and one encouragement as we commemorate Juneteenth, what would that be?
Well, first of all, Oklahoma Annual Conference, thank you for taking this issue of Juneteenth serious. And my challenge would be, first of all, my first challenge was to not simply remember Juneteenth, but allow this rich, painful, but powerful experience to help shape your future for a better tomorrow. How can Juneteenth help shape your annual conference for a better future? And so the question isn't, what are we willing to do now, but how can we really help ensure justice, equity, and opportunity happens for every future generation? That would be my first challenge to your annual conference. But also, I want to encourage you that never underestimate. This is important. Never underestimate the power of your voice and the power of the church. The church who chooses to seek courage versus comfort. It's critical that the church has always been at its best when it stood with the marginalized. The church has done great things when it challenged injustice and became a voice for the voiceless. So don't underestimate your voice. And Juneteenth reminds us all that if the church wants to remain faithful to his prophetic calling, then I'm hopeful that not only Oklahoma Annual Conference, but the church as a whole, I believe we may witness the greatest things and the greatest histories in front of us, and the best, Carlos, is still yet to come. I'm excited about that.
Yes, preach it. That's awesome. That's great. Yeah, I agree. I agree that there is exciting things coming in, and I can see that the sprouts of this new thing that God is doing among us. Now,
Yeah.
Dr. Bowie, I know this is not in the script. This is not, and we
Uh,
can delete these and we know later with editing. But if there's anything that any curriculum or book or anything that you want to recommend to
Yeah.
those who are listening to start that process of no,
Yeah.
beyond awareness, beyond just celebrating?
Yeah, I think the United Methodist discipleship ministries. They have a plethora of resources, and also Resource UMC, which is a part of the United Methodist Communications. You can find resources there, but I highly recommend a couple of books. I really, really, I think this day and age, Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson is very, very powerful and it's relevant now as we look at the whole voting rights being struck down. So, Just Mercy. I believe movies like Harriet, which talks about end of slavery, and I would say also I want to highly recommend young people. If you think about everything that happened early on before us, it happened with young people. I mean, Jesus was a young adult. He was 33. And many movements happened with young adults. I was in Montgomery, Alabama, about 2 weeks ago for the Voting Rights Act that was struck down or it had been a major challenge. And then we did a march, a 2.5 mile march crossing the Edmunds Pettus Bridge. And it was so moving that those young people, like the late John Lewis, marched across that bridge for the right to vote, for the right to be seen as human. And I believe there are other John Lewis's, other Rosa Parkses right now, young people saying, "Hey, I'm ready to cross that bridge to go from hopelessness to hope, from despair to joy." And I just believe right now, I want to encourage all the young people listening that God is calling you and God wants to use you. And even for the seasoned saints, God wants to use all of us who wants to make a dent and a difference in our dark world for such a time as this. So don't grow weary in well doing, for in due season we'll all reap a great harvest if we don't give up. So that's my encouragement and my resources.
Well, Dr. Boy, it's been a delight to talk to you and get to know you even from afar. And thank you for what you're doing with SBC 21, for that book that there to shift. I recommend it to everybody. I have read it and recommend it every time that I have anybody. What do you recommend? I said, Dare to Shift. That's a great book.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. And we are in your debt. And the Oklahoma Annual Conference is always an open door for you whenever there is something that needs to be said. We are always waiting for from your word.
Well, I appreciate you and your conference always being on the cutting edge. I thank God for your bishop, for Derek Blaze, and everything that you all do because you're setting the tone and you're making a difference more than you think. So I appreciate y'all's prophetic leadership.
We are in this special edition of the our webinar. We are coming just a bit earlier, just because today is Father's Day, and if you see me a little bit with colors, is because we are, as of right now, Mexico and South Africa is playing. So you are rocking my shirt and my love for the team. So anyway, we're going to talk today about Route 66 and United Methodism in Oklahoma. And we have with us the executive director of the Oklahoma Historical Society, Mr. Trey Thompson. Thank you for being here with us. And you've been here, you have worked in these many projects. In 2014, the project manager for the Oklahoma Capitol Restoration Project and many other things. You have a podcast that explores fascinating things about Oklahoma's unique history. So I'm just happy that you are with us here today. And of course, Reverend Jeff Jaynes, the district superintendent of the no, I'm sorry, Northeast District. Thank you, guys, for being here today. And so we are celebrating, as I said, Route 66 and United Methodism. So I will start with you, Trey. What are the factors that led to the creation of Route 66 in 1926, and why did it become one of America's most iconic highways?
Yeah, that's a great question. It really goes all the way back into the early part of the 1900s. And, by 1908, Henry Ford had invented the Model T car, and that made automobile transportation accessible to the masses. Before that, if you wanted to own a car, you probably would have spent between two and $4,000, which was the same amount that it cost most people to buy a house. And when Henry Ford invented the Model T, it changed the game. And so all of a sudden, 1908, you could buy a Model T for about $850. By the 19 teens and the early 1920s, you could buy a car for $350. And so it really made the necessity for better roads all the more apparent as you're trying to bounce along on these old wagon roads with ruts and mud and rocks and all of those kinds of things. By 1916, the federal government passes its first Federal Highway Act, which gives money to the states to build roads. By 1921, the Federal Highway Act, another one is passed again, and that provides more money to the states to build roads. And so, with all of this road building going on, the federal government starts to think, you know what? We might want to connect these roads and we might want to emphasize interstate travel. And they call a group of highway officials from all over Oklahoma or from all over the United States to get together and let's plan out a national highway system. One of those people involved in that is a man named Cyrus Avery from Tulsa, Oklahoma, who has had this dream. He's been a part of the Good Roads movement for many years. He's a county commissioner in Tulsa. He's the new highway chairman of the Highway Commission in Oklahoma. But he has this dream of a cross-country route from Chicago to Los Angeles that just happens to go through Tulsa. And through his position in helping to plan this national highway system, he's able to help get that highway enacted. And what's really interesting is they were originally going to call it Highway 60, but Kentucky wanted that designation of the road going through their state. And so they settled on Highway 66, which was a compromise at the time, but it turned out to be a happy accident because 66 has a much more musical sound than Highway 60. So that's the long and the short of it. By November 11th of 1926, the federal government signs off on the new federal highway system and Route 66 is born.
That is amazing. That is great, and thank you for that. I mean, obviously, I didn't know any of that, and probably all who are listening, it's maybe they don't know as well. So that's awesome. So you saying this Route 66 is now a very obviously a very important major road. So what is the role of Route 66 during major moments in American history, such as the Dust Bowl, the Great Depression, the post World War II travel eras?
Yeah, Route 66 was popular from the very beginning, and people were using it quite frequently. Even though it wasn't paved in many areas and wouldn't be paved for quite some time. In Oklahoma, Route 66 wasn't completely paved until 1937, and across the entire route, it wouldn't be paved until 1938. But it was a major highway from the very beginning. These towns and communities that Route 66 routed through, it was very important to them because you start to see economic activity that rises up in the forms of motels and motor courts and diners and gas stations and all those things that cater to the traveler. But there are major historic events that become associated with Route 66. And the first is the Great Migration from the central part of the country to California during the Great Depression. And that is largely attributed to the Dust Bowl, although in actuality, only about three counties in Oklahoma were officially a part of what we call that Dust Bowl region. And those are the three counties out in the Oklahoma Panhandle. Really, where most of the migration in Oklahoma comes from is from eastern and southeastern Oklahoma, where many people were sharecroppers, and the low price of cotton forced many landowners to have to get rid of sharecroppers, and they went to mechanization. And so, just like the Joad family in the movie and the book, The Grapes of Wrath, who were actually from Sallisaw, Oklahoma, it wasn't the dust that displaced them, it was the low price of cotton. And so about 60,000 Oklahomans migrate west to try to find work during those terrible times. And then, of course, you have World War II. Traffic slows down on the highway because of gas rationing and because of rationing in general. But after the war, as service members are coming back home, they're using Route 66 to take the bus to get back home. And then after that, it's the Great American Road Trip. We're in a time of economic prosperity. They have money in their pockets. They have time on their hands, the All-American 2-week vacation. So Route 66 is used heavily from the late 1940s through the 1960s. It wouldn't be until the 1970s when the highway wasn't designed to handle all the traffic that it was getting. And we have the interstate highways that come about that are being constructed, and Route 66 begins to get bypassed until it's completely decertified as a U.S. highway in 1985.
Wow. I served for many years in West Oklahoma, and I always imagined in my mind that, the Dust Bowl was, like the people living to California. It is fascinating to know that it's actually more in the northeast and east, southeast of Oklahoma.
Yeah, most of the farmers out in that area, they actually owned their own land. They weren't sharecroppers. And so they were much more tied to the land. That isn't to say that there weren't families that didn't leave. There were some that did. But many more stayed in that Dust Bowl region versus the eastern part of the state.
Fascinating. Fascinating. That's awesome. That's great. All right. Now, why do you think after the decommission in '85 that you said and people are bypassing now and these now wider and I guess more powerful, if you will, allow me to use that word, roads now being constructed, but why in the imagination of people Route 66 remains as a powerful symbol of freedom, adventure, American road trip, as I said, even after decommissioning in 1985?
Well, pop culture has a lot to do with it. And, you can think about the old television show Route 66, where the gentleman traveled around in the 1961 Corvette. The shows like Happy Days and American Graffiti, it conjures up this nostalgic notion of America in the 50s and the 60s, this era of diners and drive-ins and muscle cars, and it becomes a point of fond remembrance for people. And as also it becomes a place where we go to seek that authentic version of America, the mom and pop stores, authentic community, and building those relationships. And so out in Arizona, there was a barber in Seligman, Arizona, named Angel Delgadillo. And he says we need to preserve this road. He saw towns that were starting to dry up that had been bypassed by the interstates. And he says we need to start preserving this, and we need to start reminding people that Route 66 is still here, and all of us are still here as well. And so he starts the first Route 66 Association in all the 8 Route 66 states. And then another man from here in Oklahoma, Michael Wallace, he writes a book in the early 1990s about Route 66 that also captures that American consciousness. And then in 2006, the movie Cars comes out. And it's that great Pixar movie. And so many people, it once again, it kindles that spirit of Route 66 and this all-American, let's go rediscover America again. So there have been these milestones along the way where people have had Route 66 come back into their consciousness and they think, I want to go explore. And the great thing about it, Michael Wallace says life begins at the off-ramp. And he says, get off the interstates. Let's go discover. And what's great about Route 66 is it actually feels like one big small town from Chicago to Los Angeles. You can walk into a store, you can strike up conversations, you can meet people. And now not only you meet people from those cities and towns, but you can meet people from all over the world. I was just out in Clinton, Oklahoma, and one of our museums is the Route 66 Museum in Clinton. And I had two French journalists who were doing a story on Route 66. And it's not uncommon to look in the guest book and see 10 or 12 countries in a day represented there. So it really is where you can discover authentic people out on the Mother Road.
Um, I'm a big fan of George Lucas, and George Lucas said that American Graffiti is a love letter to a culture that was kind of dying by the mid 70s, and the cruising, that's what he called it, cruising and that kind of
Yeah.
thing. And in the movie Cars, they talk a lot about these of off ramp, and now people are going too fast and everything. And I serve in Elk City, and we had connections to the museum, the Route 66 museum, and many of them volunteers from the congregation. And they say the same thing as you said. Oh, today we have people from Denmark, from France, from England, from everywhere, and it was these just people from all over the world that you would ever imagine that they will be there. They were there, looking around.
It's where people go that want to experience what they perceive as the authentic America. And I think they're absolutely right about that. You can find it out on Route 66 for sure.
Yes. Well, again, that authenticity, I think, is a good segue for asking Jeff. So, Route 66 connected towns across, all over the United States. How has the United Methodist connection in Oklahoma served as a bridge between communities, congregations, and generations?
Well, I just want to say I don't bring the knowledge of history that Trait does, but I'm so thankful, Trait, for your witness there and the stories that you shared. My story of 66 is personal. My personal history is on 66. I grew up across from the Blue Whale, and drove
Yeah.
Route 66 every day from to school. And my office currently is next to the mural of on Route 66 of Clare in Claremore with Will Rogers. And so I get to
Oh, yeah.
drive the highways and byways, and especially on 66. We have 10 of the locations of the United Methodist Church in the Northeast District that are on Route 66 or close to it. So I get to see on a regular basis what the how the church is connecting in the communities, and everywhere from it. One of our pastors is actually doing a Route 66 sermon series through the next several weeks, where he's going through the 66 books of the Bible, and taking somehow connecting it on this journey from Chicago to LA. But this same church is a strong food pantry presence. It's Claremore Grace. That they have an amazing food pantry there in Claremore, just right off of 66, not far. And they're helping families in need. And every Sunday when you go to church there are people who have the ability to eat and people who don't. And yet everybody goes to the same buffet table together, and they get the snacks before worship. We have one of the premier childcare centers on 66 in Verdigris, that's helping kids in that community have good, affordable childcare, to go, so that their parents can work. It's outside of my district, but I know that our church in Stroud literally built a bridge. They called it was Bridges Out of Poverty, and they built this bridge between several communities on 66, Stroud, Chandler, and others, to help families in need, to find ways that the schools, DHS, and the churches could help families in need. And so there are so many stories of the ways that we across our connection are helping families in need and to bridge that gap. And there are some iconic bridges on 66, but I hope that one of the things that we're known for as a church is that bridge that we have between the church and the community. That's really who we are. It's who we've always been as United Methodist and part of this Methodist movement. But finding ways to reach outside of the walls of the church. I was actually just in Veneta recently, and they welcomed people into their church. It was June 6th, and they had, of course, 6666. They had a car show in town. They had a quilt show in town, and the church was a refuge from the rain that day, in the community too. So I hope that we do more of that, of work in and around our communities, that we go outside the walls of the church, so that we, like those bridges on 66, can truly be that connector of within our communities.
Yes, yes. And I know that, it's not happening only in the Northeast, it happens all across Oklahoma and all across our districts. All right,
That's right.
so what can today's churches learn from the resilience of Route 66 communities that adapted through economic changes, population shifts, and new opportunities? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've driven Route 66 all my life, as I said, and I've seen, businesses come and go, and yet you also see those places that have stuck around. Like the flower shop that my mom went to when I was a kid that's still there, that have it's changed hands multiple times, but it's still there. And I see that in our churches too. We've gone through a tough time, especially in the last several years. Of course, COVID hit everybody, equally, but with this affiliation and some of the other things that we've gone through, I've seen some of our churches. We had one church that's actually right there on 66. Several they voted to stay. They wanted to stay United Methodist. Several members of their congregation left and opened a church right next door. And that church, that's hard, right? That took a hit. It's an economic hit, but they're still continuing to work. And one of the things that I'm most proud of with that church is that they didn't just circle the wagons and say, okay, how can we make it? They actually went out and when I go to that church, there's regularly a backpack on the altar, and it's not a kid in the church, it's for a kid in the community to go outside the walls of the church. We have another church just farther up in the northeastern part of the state that is connecting across. They have a church, a school across the street, and they're helping make those connections. We have one church that's not far off of 66 that it didn't have a park. The church has been around for 90 years. Didn't have a parking lot. Those people have just figured out a way to park. You know why they have a parking lot now? You know why they wanted to put a parking lot in? So that they could help their neighbors, because they have a community meal and they wanted to make sure that people could come to the community meal and have a place to park. It wasn't for the church members. They had already figured out a way. They were resilient. They had done that. But it was for the members of the community who were hungry and in need of a meal. And so, like the rest stops in days of old, our church is a rest stop, a place where people can come in and find rest. It's a refuge where people can get healing for their souls, and it's a place of restoration. And so I'm seeing that in our churches. Again, I see what happens in the Northeast District, but I know that that's happening all across our conference, that churches are reaching out to be a place of refuge for families in need.
Much what Trey was saying about meeting the real people, the real USA, the real inners of the country, and really know and slowing down and getting to enjoy life and everything can happen definitely. Obviously, in any congregation for that matter, of any stripe and color, right? But of course, definitely in the United Methodist Church.
Of course.
Yes. Trey, so how have communities along Route 66 worked to preserve its history, and what can future generations learn from these preservation efforts?
It's really great that this centennial year of Route 66 has opened people's eyes to preservation and the need to make sure that we keep this history for future generations to enjoy. And one of the great things the state has done a few years ago is they created a grant program for communities along Route 66. And $6 million, a little over $6 million a year, the state has given away now for I think 3 years and will continue in the future to communities to preserve historic buildings and structures, to be able to, you mentioned the Blue Whale. The Blue Whale just had this beautiful new visitor center that they built there, adjacent to the Blue Whale, that is drawing in, hundreds of people probably a day out there right now. And that was done through this grant program. Old bridges are being restored. We got a grant here to preserve original neon signs that were along Route 66. So it really has opened people's eyes to the need to save this infrastructure, because once it goes away, you'll never get it back again. And so as communities, I think, looking at ways that we can continue to preserve all of these artifacts, preserve our oral histories, preserve those, bridges and old trading posts and structures, because those are the things that people really want to experience as they're traveling the road. I mean, obviously, a McDonald's that looks like all the other 500 McDonald's, you know, there's nothing special about that. What's special is being able to encounter something new and unique that doesn't exist anywhere else. And I'm glad the state has put money into that. Communities are putting money and funding into that because that's what it takes to do this. We all have goodwill and good intentions, but at the end of the day, we have to put our financial resources into play to be able to do this.
Yes, yes, restoration, keeping up, legacy, all that comes to mind. And with that in mind, with all this legacy and everything about the journey of us as United Methodists, but also what Route 66 represents as a journey, where do you see, and talking about legacy, right? And in these last two questions, Jeff, where do you see God leading the Oklahoma United Methodist Conference and every congregation in the next chapter of our shared journey?
Yeah, when my son was little, we took a road trip out west on Route 66, and we stopped at Lucille's Roadhouse. Actually, this cup is from Lucille's Roadhouse here, and it's the first convenience store, first gas station, and that convenience store, ultimately led to the founding of Quick Trip, in a different place in another place, but one of our community's biggest funders and corporate citizens, but also an innovative place. A convenience store. Those things didn't exist for a long time, but what started at Lucille's goes to Quick Trip, and I think we see the same thing in the church. We see innovation all over our state. On Route 66 out west, the Western Hub redefined the ways that churches could work together, rural churches working together in a shared ministry pattern. We're seeing something similar in the Tulsa area with the parish net, and I know in the southeast with the Texoma parish. So some of these parish concepts, it's an old idea. The idea of stopping for gas wasn't necessarily new, but turning it into a convenience store is what led to innovation. And the same thing is true with a parish, with the Western Hub. I think we're going to see the same kind of innovation in our church. That's one of the things that we're really trying to do up here in the Northeast is ask ourselves, what are some new ways that we can be part of innovating in the church? And we're borrowing that from other places too. Like I said, the Western Hub came first, and we're happy to borrow that idea at the parish. But what does it look like for a church to be in a multi-use building where there are restaurants and stores and offices? What does it look like for a church to have housing on its property for people of all types, right? Whether it's affordable housing or people who want to work and live in the community, artists or whoever that might be. What does it look like for the church to be church in a new way? We have one church that's looking into virtual reality Bible studies. It's not on 66, but it's close. That kind of innovation is the spirit of Route 66, and it's the spirit of the church too. A lot of the things that we do now as a church that we think are antiquated were innovations at some point. And so I'm excited to see what these innovations are that we can bring, and looking at church in a new way, just as those pioneers on the Mother Road looked at how people might stop and rest in a new way.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Thank you, Jeff. And I know that for Route 66 is still a long ways to go. And meaning that the legacy and the history and everything is just rekindled every so often. And I think that faith as well is rekindled and reimagined in doing this new thing. All right, before I let you guys, gentlemen, before I let you guys go, I want to ask you this question. It is not on the key in the sheet that I sent you, but would you share with your favorite, and I would say to Jeff, maybe outside of the Tulsa or the northeast corner of the state, your favorite, or you can say, hey, you should go check this part of the Route 66 along Oklahoma. Trade, what would be your spot if you have any or one that you can say you should go there?
Well, I really, gosh, that's such a difficult question because I've traveled so much of it in the state. I'll say this, I love the western stretches of Route 66. So if you get out into that area, Sayre and Eric to Texola, it feels it's very rural. It feels a little bit isolated out there, but those towns have really good stories associated with them. I just did a podcast about Shub Woolley and Roger Miller, who grew up two of Oklahoma's probably more famous entertainers that both grew up in this town of 1,000 people in Western Oklahoma. Roger Miller won two Emmys, or I'm sorry, he won 11 Emmys between the years 1964 and 1965. Sorry, I should have said Grammys, not Emmys. But and then Sheb Woolley was an actor. He was a musician. He taught Clint Eastwood how to ride a horse. I mean, so there are great stories out there. The Beckham County Courthouse in Sayre, it was filmed as a part of the Grapes of Wrath movie. And then you get out into Texola. It's a town that had to be surveyed 8 times over the years to figure out if it was really in Oklahoma or was it really in Texas. It's so close to the Texas line. And it has a one-room jail out there, which is kind of fun and interesting. So lots of really neat things to discover. And I just love how isolated it is out there.
Well, of course, I appreciate, Carlos, that you made me pick outside of Tulsa in the Northeast. I'm super biased up here, but I do think um, I love going to the Rock Cafe. And then I'm not this is not sponsored by them or anything, but free advertisement for them. But it's a fun place on the route on the route, and it's a place that was an inspiration part of the movie. I don't know if it's still around. It's been a minute since I've been to the Rock Cafe.
I ate there a couple of weeks ago. It is
Nice,
still
that's
there and
great
it's very good. It is well worth visiting. And Don Welch was the inspiration for the character Sally
for Sally,
in the
right?
movie Cars. So go visit it, everybody. It's worth it.
Yeah, and you can see the drawings of the guys who did the animation that are still on the
Yeah.
walls there, and so it's a special place, and I do love that western journey. Lucille's Roadhouse, stop by and get the history in that place. They've got good food too. Make sure you go to the original gas station first, and then go to the
Yeah.
newer version. But I do love, by the way, I love that there's innovation around that Lucille's Roadhouse was one of the first gas stations, and there's an electric car charger there too. So you can charge in you can fill up in a number of different ways there. So I just hit the road. One of the things that a friend of mine's doing the Chicago to LA trip, and he said that every town has the shield. As you come into the town, you can see the shield. And I was driving the other day down 66 and saw a shield for Bushy Head, Oklahoma, and White Oak, Oklahoma, and there's no buildings on the side to let you know that you're in Bushy Head or White Oak, but there's that shield on the road that all of these towns have that shield, and I'm thankful for that it's part of our history, it's part of our connection. And Carlos, you didn't ask this, but I'm a preacher, so I'm thinking in a preaching way. So sorry, Trait. But there are a lot of things about Route 66 that might seem antiquated. It might not seem as fast as the interstate. There might not be as many fast food restaurants or big box stores. But the thing that Route 66 has is connection. Outside of all of the other things that Route 66 means that we've talked about, it's literally a connector. It's a way to get people from one place to another. That same connector gets a child back to grandma's house. Gets much needed care to communities in need, gives opportunities to entrepreneurs and neighbors. It helps people in those communities start new businesses and start afresh. And those same things that made Route 66 special 100 years ago, it's why I love Route 66 today. It's why I always drive it when I'm driving around our district, because that's where the people are. That's where our communities are. And Route 66 holds us together in the same way that our church holds us together, that our connection as United Methodists holds us together. And it's the same way that the Spirit holds us all together. And so I know that that wasn't maybe one of your original questions, but it that matters deeply to us. And I hope that just as we're connected on the Mother Road from Quapaw to Texola, we're connected as churches too. And I hope we remember that.
I think that's a great wrap. So thank you, gentlemen, for doing this, and I appreciated your time. And I know that, again, you took time from your busy schedules. I know that you guys have to do things before and after, so I'm appreciative of your time, and many blessings to you all. And Trade, it's a treat to have you. And I recommend everybody to listen to your podcast and to get to know you and get to see what you're doing. And it's just been a great episode. So thank you again for everything. And for everybody
Happy to
else,
do it.
blessings. Thank you. Blessings, and see you next time.